Hello and welcome to the Almalinux Beginners course. Right now, Linux system administrators are in high demand worldwide. Businesses of every size rely on Linux to power their servers, cloud infrastructure, and applications. So knowing Linux isn't just helpful, it's essential for anyone pursuing a career in IT, DevOps, or security. This course is going to give you practical, hands-on Linux skills using Almalinux. Now, Almalinux is a stable, enterprise-grade Linux distribution that's binary compatible with Red Hat, and it's trusted by Fortune 500 companies. It's even got the backing of companies like Microsoft and Meta behind it, which is making it an extremely fast and up-and-coming operating system. It's a long-term replacement for CentOS and it's designed for enterprise environment, yet it's free and open source. And the skills that you're going to learn in this course can apply to Red Hat, Rocky Linux, and CentOS Stream 2, which are other major enterprise-grade operating systems. This is going to give you that flexibility and job readiness across multiple systems. So if you're a beginner with no prior Linux experience, or maybe a student wanting to enter the IT field, if you're a junior sysadmin wanting hands-on experience with Linux, this is the course for you. We're going to go by step-by-step guidance to set up your own Linux lab using Almalinux. We'll look at real-world lessons on managing users, securing SSH, setting up web servers, file servers, backups, and more. We'll work through some hands-on projects and we'll really get a fundamental understanding of the command line interface and some practical administration tools within this system. So what makes this course different? Well, first of all, we're taking a practical first approach. No fluff, just useful real-world information. We're going to learn how Linux works in actual IT environments, from troubleshooting to securing systems. We'll cover essential tools, and this course is taught by someone with real admin experience. I've been working with Linux now for over 15 years, and I've worked in environments, potentially managing millions of clients. So when I tell you these stories of things that you need to know, I really want you to pay attention because more than likely you're going to face them within your career. So by the end of the course, you're going to walk away with basic Linux system administration skills. You're going to understand securing these environments. We'll look at some of the common roles like web servers and file servers and show you how you can set them up at home to become experts in them. By the end of this course, you'll have a running Almalinux server, real admin skills, and the confidence to take the next step in your IT journey, whether that's applying for jobs, passing certifications, managing systems in the real world, or just adding another skill to your resume. So I hope you're excited. I certainly am. Let's go ahead and dive in. Hi everyone, and welcome. In this lesson, we're going to answer one simple but powerful question, and that is, what is Almalinux? If you've ever worked with CentOS or Red Hat Enterprise Linux, especially in server or enterprise environments, then Almalinux is something you absolutely want to know about. It's a free, open source, community-driven Linux distribution that is designed to be 100% binary compatible with Red Hat Enterprise Linux, also known as RHEL. So what does that mean? It means anything that runs on Red Hat will run exactly the same way on Almalinux. Same packages, same commands, same performance, but without the licensing costs. Now, here's the backstory. For years, CentOS was the go-to free alternative to Red Hat. It gave users the stability of an enterprise-grade OS without the price tag. But Red Hat shifted the CentOS project from CentOS Linux to CentOS Stream, changing it from a downstream build to an upstream development platform. This created a huge gap, and thousands of companies, developers, and sysadmins suddenly needed a drop-in replacement for CentOS that would remain free, stable, and production ready. And that's where Almalinux was born. The Almalinux OS Foundation stepped up to fill that void. It launched in early 2021 with a clear mission to provide a forever free enterprise-grade Linux distribution that is driven by the community and not controlled by a single company. The name Alma means soul in Latin and Spanish, symbolizing that Almalinux is the spiritual successor to CentOS. But here's what really matters for you. It's fast, it's secure, and it's reliable. It's used in data centers, on cloud servers, in development labs, and by organizations of all sizes. So whether you're hosting a website, deploying containers, or managing infrastructure, Almalinux gives you enterprise-level power at zero cost. And the best part, if you're already familiar with CentOS or Red Hat, you're going to feel right at home. So throughout the course, I'm going to be guiding you through every step from installing Almalinux to managing users, configuring services, and even setting up servers, all with hands-on demos and clear explanations. So now you know what it is and why it exists, let's dive in and get started with this amazing operating system. I really hope you're as excited as I am. I know that, understanding Almalinux for me has been a huge step up in my career and something that I've added to my resume that gets people interested, right? When you have that sort of education on the latest operating systems, employers get excited. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's talk about something that sets Almalinux apart from many other Linux distributions, and that's its strong backing by some of the biggest names in tech. When people hear that Almalinux is free and community driven, one of the first questions they often ask is, can I trust it in a serious production environment? And the answer to that is a solid yes, and here's why. Almalinux isn't just some hobby project. It's maintained by the Almalinux OS Foundation, and that foundation is supported by some very powerful allies in the tech world. We're talking companies like AMD, even Microsoft. Yes, Microsoft and Microsoft Azure backs Almalinux and offers official Almalinux images on the Azure cloud platform. And we'll be taking a look at that later on in the course. This means you can deploy Almalinux servers in minutes across Microsoft's global infrastructure, but it's not just Microsoft. You can do the same in Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud Platform as well. It's also backed by Meta, formerly Facebook, so Meta contributes to the project and even uses Almalinux internally. And there are some other major companies like Cloud Linux, cPanel, and KnownHost. These are the companies that live and breathe Linux hosting, and their support means that Almalinux is tuned for web hosting, enterprise workloads, and cloud infrastructure. The level of support brings three key benefits. Stability. Enterprise contributors test and vet Almalinux in large-scale environments, ensuring it's rock solid. Another level of support is longevity. With commercial and cloud backing, Almalinux isn't going anywhere anytime soon. You're going to get predictable release cycles and security updates for a full 10 years per version. And confidence. When major cloud platforms like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud all offer official Almalinux images, that means it's recognized as a trustworthy OS at the highest levels. So when you choose Almalinux, you're not just using yet another Linux distro, you're using a professionally supported, battle-tested operating system with the backing of giants. It's enterprise-grade Linux without the enterprise price tag, and it's here to stay. If you've looked into Enterprise Linux recently, you've probably come across four names, and that's Almalinux, CentOS Stream, Rocky Linux, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. But which one is right for you? To answer that, let's break it down by use case. So we're going to look at server environments, learning Linux, and enterprise applications. So if you're setting up production servers, whether it's for websites, databases, or internal tools, you need something stable, secure, and supported. Almalinux is great for servers. It's one-to-one binary compatible rebuild of Red Hat, meaning that everything that works on Red Hat works the same here. It's community driven and backed by big names like AMD, Meta, and Microsoft Azure, and the biggest part is you get 10 years of support per release. Now, Rocky Linux is also Red Hat compatible clone. It's very similar to Almalinux in goal and execution. The difference is mostly in governance. So really, it's great for free, and you could go down the Rocky Linux path, but a lot of organizations are choosing to go with Almalinux because of that support and because of the foundation that is running it. Red Hat is, best in class for servers, but you are going to come with a cost when using Red Hat, right? It is not free, it is enterprise grade software and you have to pay for it. So it really depends on your use case. Of course, you do get some official support with Red Hat, but if you're looking at free alternatives, Almalinux and Rocky Linux are the ones to go to. And just for your record, I do also have a course on Rocky Linux if you're interested in learning that as well. Now, when it comes to learning Linux, Almalinux is a fantastic operating system because it mirrors Red Hat. So this way you're going to get hands-on experience with what's used in real-world enterprise environments without the subscription. So, and remember as well, Almalinux is for free, so you're going to be able to smack that on your resume that you now have the skills to be able to use Almalinux as well as Red Hat Enterprise Operating System. So for enterprise applications, Red Hat is still the go-to for most enterprises. However, Almalinux is gaining serious traction in enterprise. It's used by hosting providers, research institutions, and even big tech firms. And it has those backing of the major organizations, and it's slowly starting to become certified by a lot of third-party vendors. So choosing between Linux distributions really depends on your goals, but if you want stability without cost, I would definitely go with Almalinux because it is fast becoming the bigger of the free enterprise grade operating systems out there when it comes to Linux. So whatever your choice though, you're going to be working with a Red Hat compatible tech, which is one of the most respected foundations in the Linux world. And like I say, it's certainly what employers look for. One of the most important things to consider when choosing a Linux distribution, especially for servers and enterprise use, is the support lifecycle. In other words, how long will I get updates, security patches, and bug fixes? Well, Almalinux delivers exceptionally well in this area, offering a stable, predictable, and enterprise-grade long-term support model. Every major release of Almalinux is supported for a full 10 years. That means you get those security updates, you get those bug fixes, you get those performance patches, and they're all aligned closely with what Red Hat provides. And this is what makes Almalinux a drop-in replacement for RHEL, especially valuable for users who want the same long-term stability without the licensing costs. So security these days is a top priority of any organization, and Almalinux regularly patches CVEs, so common vulnerabilities and exposures, to make sure your system stays secure. These updates are managed by the Almalinux OS Foundation and the community, and the team also participates in initiatives like OpenELA, a collaboration with other open source enterprise Linux distributions to ensure patch parity and long-term viability. So we can see here that Almalinux OS 9, the current latest edition, will have active support until 31st of May 2027 and security support until 31st of May 2032, which as you can see is 10 years from its first release date. Now, Almalinux does follow a point release model. That means that new features and improvements come in small predictable updates. So for example, 9 to 9.1 to 9.2, all the way up to 9.6, which is current as of 20 May 2025. You don't have to upgrade to the next major version for years, and that means you can plan your infrastructure lifecycle with confidence. Now, after that 10-year window, that specific version of Almalinux does reach end of life, meaning no more updates are officially provided. And that's where, you would really have to consider it before hitting that 10-year point, upgrading to the next major version. But you have 10 years to do it, I can't really think of any other operating system that does that. You think about even Windows, right? They're not releasing new versions every 10 years. They're releasing new versions every 2 to 3 years, right? And the support life cycle for them often ends at 5 to 6 years. So you're constantly having to perform these refreshes. So why does all this matter? Whether you're running production systems, hosting enterprise apps, or just learning Linux for your future career, you want a system that won't leave you hanging after just a couple of years. Almalinux gives you a decade of worry-free support with no cost, no license, and no lock-in contract. That's what makes it one of the best long-term choices for Linux users today. Let's talk about something critical, and can Almalinux be trusted in enterprise environments? And the answer is a solid yes. Now, enterprises demand a lot from their operating systems. They need stability and uptime. We need security and patching, long-term support, vendor compatibility, and commercial backing. Traditionally, these needs have been met by commercial options like Windows, Red Hat, Linux, or something like CentOS Stream. But with the shift in CentOS, many organizations began looking for a free drop-in enterprise-grade alternative, and that's where Almalinux steps in. It's a one-to-one binary compatible clone of Red Hat, and that means anything built or certified for Red Hat will run exactly the same on Almalinux. This compatibility is critical in enterprise scenarios where custom applications, commercial databases, and tools like SAP, Oracle, or VMware are part of the infrastructure. It's governed by the Almalinux OS Foundation, and it has major backed players like Microsoft Azure, AMD, Meta, and CERN. And this kind of support shows that Almalinux is more than just a hobby project, it's a strategic open source initiative with global scale contributors. We spoke about the long-term support, which is going to give you that long-term confidence. And, let me give you a few real-world examples of where we're seeing Almalinux being deployed today. So we're seeing it being used by cloud service providers who want to offer you a Red Hat compatible virtual machine without the cost of licensing. We're seeing it used in educational institutions and research labs where they run massive clusters and high-performance compute environments. And enterprises with large CentOS footprints are migrating to Almalinux to maintain Red Hat compatibility but without that vendor lock-in. Almalinux does maintain a FIPS-compliant kernel, and the project is working towards FedRAMP compatibility, which is important for US government and defense contractors. So yes, Almalinux isn't just for labs or hobbyists. It's a powerful enterprise-ready operating system already trusted by some of the world's largest companies. And that's why by you running up your own internal lab and learning this operating system, it's going to send your career forward by absolute miles, especially if you're one of the first to get certified and really understand this operating system. That's going to give you a leg up for the future. So let's go ahead and continue talking about Almalinux before getting a dive into the hands-on labs and get our hands dirty with how this operating system works. So with the modern shift of technology moving into the cloud, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, can I run Almalinux in the cloud? And the answer is a resounding yes, and not just on one platform. Almalinux is officially available on major cloud providers like AWS, so Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud, as well as others. So let's dive into what that means and how it benefits you. Almalinux provides official cloud-optimized images for most major cloud providers. That means you don't need to manually install or convert anything. You can launch an Almalinux instance in seconds, just like you would with, say, Ubuntu or Red Hat, and these images are maintained and updated regularly by the Almalinux Foundation. So what cloud providers can we run Almalinux on? Well, you probably have heard of Amazon Web Services. So the Almalinux is available in the AWS Marketplace. It does support EC2, Elastic Load Balancing, EBS, and more. And this is great for building Red Hat compatible cloud environments, but without the licensing requirements. So you can go ahead and jump into the AWS Marketplace and see those compatible images be available. It's also available in Microsoft Azure. So the official Almalinux images are available in the Azure Marketplace. And with Almalinux being backed by Microsoft itself as a major sponsor, that is huge news. This is ideal if you're using Microsoft Azure right now, you're looking to move into the cloud. Microsoft Azure would definitely be one of the front runners at your mind if you are needing to run Linux workloads because of that backing. So it's ideal for enterprise workloads needing Red Hat compatibility in Azure. It is also available in Google Cloud Platform and other platforms like Oracle Cloud, DigitalOcean, Proxmox, or you can always bring your own ISO to the cloud and create custom images. So even in the cloud, Almalinux receives timely security patches, bug fixes, performance updates, and more. Since Almalinux is Red Hat compatible, it works seamlessly with things like Terraform, Ansible, Kubernetes, and more. And this makes it an excellent base OS for containerized applications, CI pipelines, and infrastructure as code deployments. So in the cloud, every dollar counts, and Almalinux provides the same stability and compatibility as Red Hat, but without the licensing costs. That means you can spin up 1 to even 1,000 Almalinux virtual machines without worrying about subscriptions. So this is ideal for startups, research labs, and cloud-native businesses. If you're studying Linux or preparing for certifications, cloud platforms certainly make it easy to spin up Almalinux instances for practice, and many platforms even offer free tier instances, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. So in summary, the official images do exist on AWS, Azure, and GCP, and more. They're securely and frequently updated. They work with cloud native and DevOps tools, and it's a cost-effective way of getting enterprise-grade reliability. So these VMs can be perfect for production, testing, or learning. So if you have a Microsoft Azure portal and you have a free services account, which is available for everyone that has Microsoft Azure, you can simply navigate to free services. You'll find the Linux virtual machines option, so you get 750 hours a month of B1S and B2 ATS v2 VMs. If you click on create here, it's going to navigate into the create a virtual machine webpage. So you're going to need to create a resource group. So we just call this like DMT RG01. You would need to give a virtual machine name, but check this out. When we drop down image, Almalinux 9 is there, and it's one of the very few available on Microsoft Azure. So you can go ahead and create a free Almalinux VM for 750 hours a month. Now granted, you don't get a whole lot of resources with that, 1 vCPU and 1 gig of memory, but typically it can be used for at least testing. So from there, you would just go through, set up your administrator account, configure things like if you're going to use SSH or password, if you're going to allow SSH accessible over the internet. My recommendation is try and tie this down to your public IP address so you don't get like brute forced and hacked or anything like that. But I just wanted to let everyone know that if you're struggling to run it in your laptop or in your home lab, you can always look at a free alternative like Microsoft Azure. But I believe that Amazon AWS also offer a free tier, and Almalinux is available there as well. If you are looking at running this in a business or enterprise grade environment and not the free services, then creating an Almalinux virtual machine is incredibly easy as well. You would simply just go to virtual machines, click create Azure virtual machine, and from here you would just go through the wizard, the kind of setup wizard, and over on the right hand side you'd even get an estimated monthly cost. So we create a resource group, for example. We'd give the machine a name, so we could say something like Almalinux 01, specify our region. Let's say, for example, we wanted South Central US. Pick if we wanted infrastructure redundancy or not, being that this would probably be in a business environment. We most likely would. We'd have something like availability zones configured. We would set the security type, and then image, we would make sure we pick Almalinux OS 9. So otherwise you can just type in Alma and you would see it appear there. And then you just go through the standard prompts. So let's say, for example, we wanted to get a bigger VM. We would go in here and pick the correct size. We would set up the authentication. From there, it's setting up disks. It's setting up the networking, the management, the monitoring, the advanced, and finally creating that VM. And then you might use something like Bicep to go ahead and automate this process if you're going to be spinning up lots of these instances, because having to go through this wizard, if you're spinning up, say, even 10 to 20 VMs, is going to be extremely time consuming. But I just wanted to kind of show how easy it is and that it is natively supported within Microsoft Azure. When it comes to Almalinux, no matter if you're installing this on a physical machine or in a virtual environment, there are certain system requirements that are needed. But they're not too intensive, as Linux is not a resource intensive operating system, and Almalinux especially so. So requirements wise, really all you need is at least 10 gigabytes minimum of disk space, but 20 gigabytes is recommended for all the files and folders that come along with the installation. And memory wise, or RAM, we just need a minimum of 1.5 gigabytes. So if you're creating a lot of different VMs and they're not going to be running too much intensive load, you may get away with 2 gigabytes, for example, but the more load you put on them, the more memory required. So there are more requirements held at Red Hat Enterprise Linux capabilities and limits. So if you click on that link, it's going to take us here, and it talks all about logical CPUs, maximum memory, minimum disk space, things like that. So if you are going to be working on any intensive loads, definitely go check this article out. Otherwise, as long as you're just setting it up in a lab environment like we're about to, just refer to the system requirements of Almalinux, and that should be fine. Architectures wise, it does have support for x86-64, Arch-64, PPC-64IE, and S390X. Now, most systems, I'm going to say, are probably going to be this one right here, but you may have some that require this here. When we're talking about Almalinux, we need to talk about versions, and this is something that confuses a lot of beginners. When you're downloading Almalinux or updating your system, you're often going to see version numbers. These can be things like 8, 8.9, 9, 9.3, but what do those numbers actually mean, and which one should you use? Let's break it down. Almalinux uses a major.minor versioning format, just like Red Hat, because it's built to be fully compatible. For example, version 8.10 means that 8 is the major version and 9 is the minor update to that version. So they go in sequence, so it would have been 8.0, 8.1, 8.2, all the way up to 8.10. Over on the left hand side here, Almalinux 9.6, that means major version is 9 and the 6th minor update since 0.0. Each major version stays the same for years, but it gets regular minor updates that includes things like security patches, bug fixes, and updated packages. And these updates are stable and carefully tested, so you won't be surprised by anything breaking. Now, there are 2 current supported versions as of making this video. That's Almalinux OS 8. This is the original release line after the CentOS shift. It's still widely used and will receive support up till May 2029. We have Almalinux 9. This is the newer modern release line. It's based on Red Hat 9 and will be supported until May 2032. So think of it, that's a long time of guaranteed security and stability, 10 years from the initial release date. Now, if you're asking should you use version 8 or 9, here's how to decide. You're going to use Almalinux 9 if you're starting a new project, you want the latest features and hardware support, or if you're running newer applications. But you may need to use Almalinux 8 if you're migrating from CentOS 8 or Red Hat 8, or your software stack is tested and certified for version 8, or you need something that's been very proven over many years. Either way though, you're getting a rock solid enterprise grade OS with long-term support. In our course, we are going to be focusing entirely on the newer version, OS 9, because like I say, for anyone starting new projects, they should be focusing on this release, but a lot of the stuff is backwards compatible as well. So we've already spoke about that each major version gets 10 years of support. It does get regular minor version updates, probably about every 6 months or so, and security patches as needed. And of course, you don't need to upgrade to new major versions right away. I know lots of organizations are still running Almalinux OS 8 because it still is in a supported format, and it's still going to be getting continued updates for years. But one of the biggest selling points of Almalinux is the fact that those long life cycles make it perfect for those servers, data centers, long-running applications, and learning environments. So to recap, Almalinux versions follow the major-minor format. Version 8 is mature and widely adopted, but version 9 is modern and best for new deployments. Each major version gets 10 years of support, and I know as of making this video, they are working on version 10 coming out rather soon, so keep an eye out for that. So whether you're using it for learning, for work, or for building something big, you can trust that its versioning model is simple, predictable, and built for the long haul. Alrighty, so you're ready to get started with Almalinux, and the first step we need to do is downloading the ISO file. So if you don't know what an ISO file is, think of it as like a digital DVD. It's an image of the Almalinux installation disk, and you use it to install Almalinux on a virtual machine. You can also use it to install on bare metal hardware, but you'll need to write that ISO image onto a bootable USB. So Almalinux is completely free to download and always will be. To get the ISO, you're just going to go to the official Almalinux website. There will be a big green download button right here, and this will take you to the download page. Now you are going to see a few different options based on the version and architecture. Starting off, there are 3 different types of ISO files. There's the DVD ISO. This is the full installer with most software and packages included. It's ideal for offline installed or full featured setups. It is a lot larger though. It's around about 8 gigabytes, but it can be a good idea to do if you're not wanting to build a whole lot of packages after install. There's the minimal ISO, which is a much smaller image, around 2 gigabytes or less. It's great for advanced users who want a custom minimal install, but you will need internet access on the virtual machine or physical machine to install most of the packages because it does come with a minimal self-containing image. Finally, there is the boot ISO. So this is very small, mostly used for network installations. Not ideal for beginners unless you're setting up a network-based install server. So for most beginners, I would recommend the DVD ISO, but because it's quite large, let's go ahead and stick with the minimal ISO for this course. Now, architecture-wise, there are a couple of different architectures supported. So there's Intel AMD x86/64. This is standards for 64-bit systems, so most laptops and desktops use this. The other one that can be quite common is for Arch64, so this is for ARM-based devices like Raspberry Pis or some cloud VMs, as well as there's also the IBM Z and the Power ALE. Now you can download the ISO via the HTTP mirrors, otherwise you can get it via torrent. This is a great choice if you want faster speeds and to also help share the download, but use whatever works best for your internet connection. So like I say, we are going to be using the minimal ISO right here. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and just click on this button right here. It's going to start the download in your browser. Doesn't matter if you're using Edge, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, whatever. It will start the download. We can see that it's roughly about 2.2 gigabytes. So I'm going to let that one download, and then in the next lesson, we can start building our virtual machine out and getting this run up in our lab environment. I'll go ahead and see you there. Now, one of the big decisions that you have to make early on is, do you want to use a graphical user interface or stick with the command line interface? Now, both options are valid and the choice really depends on your goals, your environment, and your comfort level. Let's break it down. So the graphical interface is what probably most people are familiar with, especially if you're coming over from operating systems like Windows or Mac OS. If you choose server with GUI during installation, you'll boot into a desktop environment that looks and feels a lot like Windows or Mac OS. Now, the pros of using the GUI is it is beginner friendly, so it's easy to navigate and is visually intuitive. You can browse files and folders just like any desktop OS. You can manage software, users, and settings without needing to know any command lines. And it's great for desktop environments, light server tasks, and remote access with VNC. However, the cons of using the GUI are more resource usage. It certainly consumes more RAM and CPU, and when we're working in enterprise and server environments, those sorts of resources count, right? It's a lot slower, especially on older hardware or VMs, and it's really not commonly used in production environments, especially in enterprise servers. That's why in this course, we are going to be teaching you the non-graphical interface, and that's the CLI. So we'll be choosing the minimal install, which means we boot directly into a terminal, no desktop environment. This is called the command line interface. It may look intimidating at first, but it's incredibly powerful as a system administrator. It's lightweight and fast, it gives us more control, it's certainly preferred in production environments, and if you have this skill on your resume, you're going to be in great demand, and it's also better for scripting and automation. Now, it does come with a bit of a steeper learning curve, but that's exactly why you're here in this course. So we are going to be spending time in the CLI to build out your real skills, and that way you'll be comfortable in this environment, which is more commonly what you'll see in the business environment. Now, for any of you who aren't familiar with what a CLI interface looks like, it's exactly like this, right? There's no graphical user interface, there's no graphics at all, it is just command line, command line, command line. So let's go ahead and dive on in. Alrighty, welcome to the lab section of this course. Now that we've downloaded the Almalinux ISO, it's time to set up your lab environment using a virtual machine so that you can safely practice and learn without affecting your main computer. So why are we using a virtual machine? Well, a virtual machine, or a VM as I'll often refer to it, is a computer inside the computer, and it lets us install Almalinux and experiment freely with the option to reset, clone, or delete the environment at any time. In the real world, I would say probably 90+% of Almalinux machines are going to be running in virtualized environments, right? It's very rare that you need to install Linux on a physical server, so more likely than not, this will be the process you'll follow to install it on a virtualized environment. Now for this demo, I will be using VMware Workstation Pro, a popular virtualization platform for Windows that is free, but you can use any hypervisor you like. Some of you may have VirtualBox, it's also free and open source. Some of you may have Hyper-V environments, VMware ESXi, or even using cloud-based options. The exact steps might vary slightly depending on your platform, but the general process is the same. So what we're going to do in VMware Workstation is I'm going to click on Create a New Virtual Machine. Now I'm just going to go through the wizard here. I'm going to select Typical. I am going to select my ISO that I just downloaded. So this is that Almalinux minimal ISO. You can see here that Almalinux is detected. So we'll go next. We're going to just call this one, the virtual machine name is going to be Almalinux, and I'm going to pick a location on my SSD. All right, looks like that one might already exist on my machine. So we'll just say Almalinux dev. Now for the disk capacity, I am going to store all my virtual disk on a single file, and I'm going to make this 64 gigabytes in size. So you remember that the recommended minimum is 20 gigabytes, but I'm going to give it a little bit more as I may be installing and using this more than just the defaults. Go next, and we're going to customize the hardware. I'm going to be giving this 8 gigs of memory. That's because that's how much I have available for it. If you have less, if you're on like a laptop or a less powerful workstation, the minimum and the recommended is 2 gigabytes, but feel free to give it 4A if you want a bit of a speedier process. Processors wise, I'm going to assign it 8 cores. I'm going to bridge the network adapter so it gets its own private IP address on my home lab LAN, and I'm just going to leave the rest as default, making sure that the ISO is selected and connected on at power. So that is it. I have now set up my virtualization machine. In the next video, we'll be doing a guided installation step-by-step walkthrough. But for now though, if you're following along at this point, you should have a virtual machine ready to go and the ISO mounted ready to boot up. I'll go ahead and see you in the next video. Now that we have created the shell for the virtual machine, it's now time for us to walk through the installation process step by step. This is the same installation process you'd use whether you're installing it on a physical server, a VM, or even in the cloud. Just getting to this point may vary. With a physical machine, you would have to create a bootable ISO, etc. But with a virtual machine, you just create it in your virtualization platform. So at this point, I am going to hit power on this virtual machine. And when your VM starts, you're going to see a boot menu. We are going to select the option install Almalinux 9.6. We're not going to select test this media. We're going to just select install, which is going to go straight through the installation process. I'm also just going to get this yellow bar out of the way here. We don't need it. So we'll click install. Now we need to wait a moment for the graphical installer to load. So all of the files and everything you need to install Almalinux are contained in that ISO. Remember, it's about 2.2 gigabytes, so it needs to unpack a few things. It needs to get a few things ready, and already we can see that start to go. Now don't worry, you don't have to understand every single line of what it's telling you here. It's just going through and starting up all the services it needs to prepare the installation process. So at this point, you can see here, it's now telling us it's starting the installer. It's loaded up Almalinux 9.6, which is the version we will be installing. If you're watching this in the future and there's a later version available, the process probably hasn't changed much, if any at all, so you can still continue with this course. So first thing we need to do is we need to choose a language, and you can see there are lots of ones available thanks to the community contributing to that. In my case, I am going to pick English Australia because that's my language. So we'll go continue. And the cool thing is it has a graphical interface, right? So you can just click, you don't have to do everything through command line. It does have a graphical interface. Now you'll see the installation summary screen. This is where we configure everything for the bootloader and for the virtual machine. So you do have to pay attention here because anything wrong, you're pretty much going to have a bit of a hard time going back and fixing it up. So we've already selected the keyboard and the language support. Time and date will change that to be correct. So that's going to be Australia, Melbourne. Really nice graphical interface. I absolutely love this layout of how you set the time zones. And you also have an option of, if it gets it wrong for whatever reason, customizing the date and time. You can pick 24-hour or AM, PM time. I'm just going to stick with 24. And then we've just clicked done. So keyboard's done, language is done, time and date is done. Installation destination. Now, this is where we're going to see the VM's virtual hard disk. And remember, we've only got the one, right? In our case, we are just going to select automatic partitioning. You really want to select this unless you need to do custom layouts, which is a bit more of an advanced topic. So just stick with automatic unless you absolutely know what you're doing. And then in that case, you would select custom. If you had multiple disks connected on boot up, you would have to select the one that you want to be the boot medium. But in our case, we just have the one. Now, also bear in mind that for environments, when you do this, it's going to overwrite the disk. So it's going to overwrite any existing data. Now, this is a brand new virtual hard disk, so we don't have to worry about that. But if it was a physical machine, we'd want to make sure that whatever data was on that drive, or, hopefully it'd be brand new, but if it wasn't, whatever data on that drive, we're okay with losing. But because we're installing this on virtual disk, we do not need to worry. So we'll go done. So at this point, we have also selected the storage. We're not going to worry about the key dump. You can go and configure a static IP through the network and hostname. So you would simply just go and click on configure and change the settings in IPv4. I actually want to show this once the machine has booted up, so I'm not going to worry about this right now. All right. The kind of crux of this is, yes, you can do it while you're going through the installation medium, but a lot of people are going to have to want to change this once a machine is fully booted, and I want to show that process. So for now, we'll just leave it on DHCP, which is absolutely fine, but you can see there are a lot of settings that you can go through and configure if you need to get this installation working. You can also set the hostname here, so we might just do that. We'll just say like almalinux-dev. We'll hit apply, and that's going to change the host name, but we'll leave the network alone. So we'll go done. Next up, we have the software selection. So you can go and pick some additional software. Now, depending on your ISO, this is going to change. You might be able to choose your software environment. So for example, you could say, I want to install this with standard installation. You could add development tools. At the moment, we've just got minimal installation here. You can set up network servers. All of this can be configured from the get-go, or you can always install it at a later date. So for now, we're just going to stick with minimal, and we can always come and install those later. We also have security profile, so you can change the security profile, a bit more of advanced settings, so we won't touch that. The last thing we do want to set is the root, password, and the user creation. So the root password, we need to set a secure password for the root user. This is the administrator account, all right? So we're gonna make sure that it's strong, all right? In the real world, you'd make this something extremely strong and then go ahead and do something like save it in a password vault or some sort of password management system. But for now, we're gonna just pop it in here, and you have the option to lock out the root account, but also allow SSH login with roots. Now, typically neither of these are best practice. You might lock the root account in some environments, but typically as long as you're securing it properly, you don't need to do that. So we'll go done. And the last thing is we need to create a user. So I'm going to call this user controller, and I am going to make this user an administrator, and I am going to require a password to use this account. So the password, we'll type in something secure. Again, being an administrator account, we'd want to save this somewhere as well. There are some advanced settings where you can change the home directory, the group and user IDs, and the group membership, but we'll just leave those as standard. All right, now if we didn't tick this option, it would just be a standard user, but since we have ticked it, this is going to be an admin user. So now we've done everything in our checklist. We're going to double check everything, and once ready, we're going to click Begin Installation. Almalinux will now install. And this is going to take a little bit of time, right? So what I'll do is I'll put some nice background music on for anyone who wants to watch the installation process or who's following along at home. That's absolutely fine. Otherwise, you can just skip forward in the video to once it's completed and we can continue on with the lesson. Alrighty, so the installation process has completed. We're now getting prompted to reboot the system. So we'll click this button here. It's going to go through the reboot process, and then we're going to be presented with our Almalinux CLI interface that we can start working on. So let's go ahead and get there, and then in the next video we'll start going through some of the first time login steps and the verification to make sure everything's okay. I'll go ahead and see you there. Hello everyone and welcome back. Now that Almalinux is installed on your virtual machine, it's time for your first login and to run a few post-installation checks to make sure everything went smoothly. Let's dive in. So when your system boots up, you'll land on the minimal version CLI text-based login prompt. We're just going to put in the username of which we created during the installation procedure. So for us, that was controller, and the password. And there we go. We are now logged in. So we're at the command line prompt and it's telling us that we're logged in as controller at almalinux-dev, and that's the name of this virtual machine. Now, some environments, they have the name of the machine in all caps or in all lowercase. In this case, I just went with something that felt natural, but do keep in mind that some organizations have strict policies on what they call the users and what they call the machines themselves. So now that we're logged in, we can run our first command, and what we're going to do is we're going to check the OS version that we installed to make sure everything is okay. So we'll do a cat space /etc/os-release. And this is going to give us a whole heap of information about the Almalinux virtual machine that we installed. It tells us that we're running version 9.6, which is called Sage Margay. I might have completely botched that name, but I think that's how you pronounce it. So we can confirm that's all good. Now remember, during the installation we just used DHCP, so we should have an IP address, and we can test that by doing a ping google.com, and we can see that those pings are successfully reaching there and coming back. If you want to check your IP address, we can just type in the word IP space ADDR, and you can see there that second adapter, not the loopback adapter, that's the first one. The second adapter, ENS160, has an IP address in the correct range. So really at this point in time, we have performed a couple of simple checks to make sure we know what version of Almalinux we're running. We've made sure the network is running, and this is a good practice every time you install to make sure you've done everything correctly. That's really it though for the first time login and post-installation verification. Up next, we're really going to start diving into how to use this system. So I'll go ahead and see you there. Hey everyone, and welcome to this lesson on enabling SSH and setting up remote access in Almalinux. SSH, or Secure Shell in its long form, is the most common and secure way to remotely manage Linux servers, whether you're managing a server in the cloud, at the office, or in your home lab. It's an essential tool that you're going to be using daily. Now, by default, SSH is typically pre-installed, but we can always just double check that by running a sudo dnf install, and the package is open ssh-server. Now don't worry, we'll talk a lot more about dnf install later on, but for now we're just going to run that command. We need to elevate ourselves up to sudo privileges, so that's super admin privileges, with the password. And you can see there that it is already installed. So we can check that it's running with a sudo systemctl status sshd. And what we're doing here is we're just checking if the process is running, which we can see it is active, so it is. So you'll remember through the installation media, we actually left it on a DHCP. We will change this in a little bit, but for now, as long as we've got a DHCP address, we can just type in the command IP space ADDR to get our IP address. So now we're going to open a remote console. I'm using PuTTY. You can use whatever you would like. And we're going to go to 192.168.1, 69.55, which is the IP address you can see right here. If we hit enter, you might get a little pop-up asking you if you trust the key. As long as this is a trusted server, you can click yes, and then we're just going to log in. And there we go. We have now successfully logged in using SSH. So there are a few things we'll do later on to secure this protocol down, but now this is how you'll be mainly accessing the boxes, right? You don't want to have to jump into the console of your VMware or your Hyper-V every time you want to configure the machine, because there's a lot of limitations there. Instead, you'll be running some sort of remote access program, and this is exactly what we can use to manage the system moving forward. Welcome back, everyone. In this session, we're going to learn how to set a static IP address in Almalinux. Now, before that though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my PuTTY. I'm going to go into change settings. I'm going to select appearance, and I'm just going to turn the font up a little bit so it'd be easier for everyone to see. Now by default, most systems get an IP address automatically from a DHCP server. But for servers, virtual labs, and enterprise environments, we often want a static IP. Now, in my environment, I do have a router giving off DHCP, and that's how this one picked up an address. But you'll remember when we were installing Almalinux, I showed you the option of where you can configure a static IP straight from the get-go. So you're welcome to go ahead and do it there. Otherwise, I'll show you how to do it once you're in the actual box itself. We want a static IP because we want something predictable that won't change after a reboot. With DHCP, you always risk losing the IP address if someone else was to lease that one out. But with statics, we know it's permanent, so that way we can set up all of our DNS records as well as other services to point at this server. So there is a really easy way that Almalinux allows us to configure static IPs, and that's with a sudo nmTUI, so Network Manager TUI, and the TUI stands for Text User Interface. So all up, it's the Network Manager Text User Interface. And if we hit enter, it's going to ask for our password to elevate ourselves up. So we have a couple of different options here, and we use the up and down arrows. If it's highlighted in red, that's how you know what option is selected. So if you go to radio, for example, you can see there that Wi-Fi hardware is missing. So we probably want to disable that. We can just hit the space bar, and WWAN as well. Then we'll go to back and hit enter. We could change the system host name in here. We're just going to leave it as almalinux-dev. We can activate a connection, but what we're interested in is editing a connection. So I'm going to hit enter. We only have the one Ethernet adapter. If you had multiple, they would show in here, and they may display different names, but in my case, it's ENS160. I'm going to use my right arrow key to navigate over to the right, then down to hit edit, and I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard to go into those settings. So here is where you can configure all of the IP settings for this device. We have a profile name, we have the device, we have Ethernet 802.1x security, but we want to navigate down to IPv4 configuration. We want to hit the space bar. We're going to change that to manual by hitting enter. So we'll hit space. We can go up and down in this list with our up and down keys, but we want to go over manual and then hit enter. Over on the right, we're then going to click show, hit enter to drop it down, and we're going to start putting in our device's details. So the address I'm going to put as 192.168.69.222. The gateway in my case, I'm going to pick 69.254. And you'll see here there is an add button, so you can add multiple addresses per interface, but typically there's not many environments where that would be needed, so we'll just have the one. For DNS, I'm going to point it first at Cloudflare's public DNS server. Then I'm going to add a second one and add in Google's public DNS. So if you had some sort of internal DNS server, you would probably point these at that. For now though, I am just going to leave everything else as is. So never use this network for a default route. We don't want to tick that. We don't want to ignore automatic obtain routes. We don't want to obtain DNS parameters. So we'll just leave all of those. We are going to leave ticked automatically connect and available to all users though. And then finally with our down arrow, we're going to make it all the way to OK and hit OK. We're then going to navigate down to back. We're going to go to activate a connection, and we're going to deactivate. And what this is going to do is this is going to essentially shut down our interface, right? Because you'll remember that we are SSH'd onto this box. So what we've done is we've essentially lost connection. So we're going to open up our console. We're going to go into the nmTUI, so sudo nmTUI. We'll put in the password. Now VMware can be a little bit funny with nmTUI. I've found the up and down arrows can be a little bit strange, but as long as we can make it to activate a connection, which it's going to test my patience here. You can hear me clicking the keys and nothing's happening. Alright, so we made it there. We're going to then hit activate. Now we're going to go back to our PuTTY it's going to have crashed out. We're going to go new session and we're going to put in the new IP address. And this is this little security alert that we can get. Then we're going to go controller, log in as our admin, and there you go. If we do an IP ADDR now, you can see that we have successfully set the static IP. So do just be careful when you're deactivating the port and re-enabling it, because you are going to have to go back into the console. So if we now do a sudo nmty, go back in, edit connection, go to edit, we can see all the parameters we entered here. We can go back. We can see that we turned off Wi-Fi, and when, if you are using Wi-Fi, then you would enable this and you can configure it from the nmty as well. But that's it really. We have now seen how to configure a static IP address on Almalinux, and this is a crucial skill for any server and network setups. So well done, congratulations. Let's continue the course. Hey everyone, and welcome to this session where we're going to be talking about keeping your Almalinux system up to date and managing software with the DNF package manager. DNF is the next generation version of the older Yum package manager, and it's the default in Almalinux and other Red Hat based systems too. So remember, by regularly system updating our environments, it's extremely critical, especially these days when there are so many security flaws being exploited every single day. Regular system updates are critical because they include security patches, bug fixes, performance improvements, and newer features. So on our servers, keeping your system updated helps protect against vulnerabilities and ensure stability. So to update everything on our system, we can run a sudo DNF update. We're going to have to elevate ourselves up to sudo privileges, so we'll have to enter in our password, and we'll hit enter. And you can see what actually needs to be updated before doing it. So you can see here it's going to be installing some kernel packages, kernel modules. In total, they're about 92 megabytes in size. So of course, we always want to really read the release notes before doing any updates to ensure it's not going to impact our systems. But let's imagine we've gone through, we've ensured that this is not going to cause any issues. Maybe we tested it on a dev box first. So we'll just type in Y, hit enter, and it will begin downloading the packages. And you can keep track of it with this handy little tool right here. It's going to tell you the speeds at which it downloaded, how much it downloaded, and if it's a big package, it will also show you the DNA. So at this point, it has gone ahead and installed, and it's asking us, do we trust this GPG key from Almalinux? We're going to go ahead and verify that and then hit Y. And it's going to go through and start actually installing them. So it's done the downloads. The next step is to start the actual installation. So it's going to go through and do this all automatically. It's very hands off. We don't need to do much. The longer you wait to update your system, obviously the more there's going to be. You know, I've seen situations where this can take, 15 to 20 minutes of doing updates. So just kind of keep that in mind. So it's going through, it's running all of the scripts it needs, it's running all of the installs. Without internet connection, obviously this isn't going to be able to work because it's not going to go out and pull them down, but with internet it runs like a charm. Now if you wanted to see what would be updated before actually doing it, we can do a DNF check-update. Alright, and that will reach out and let us know what needs to be updated, so we can always do that beforehand. This is going to show you a list of available package updates without actually making any changes. Now, to install software using DNF, we can do sudo DNF install. And let's say, for example, we wanted to install a package called htop, which is a really powerful system monitoring tool. We would just type in htop. All right, so it looks like it has not found it. So let's try something else. Let's imagine we wanted to install something like Apache. And what you can do as well is you can typically, all right, so I wasn't able to find Apache either. Nope. What about MariaDB? There you go. So it's reached out, it's found the MariaDB package, and it's telling us all of what we would want to install. Now I'm going to hit no here. So if we don't want to install it, we're going to hit no because we're going to be looking at that a little bit later on. But you've seen the syntax now. It's essentially sudo DNF install and then the package name. If you do sudo DNF install, and then, oops, install spelled correctly. You can hit enter and get all of the usage or arguments available for it. So they're all listed here. And that's a really handy tip for Linux installations, is if you don't complete a command, it's going to tell you how to use it. If we wanted to uninstall something, we would just simply do a sudo dnf remove. So you would do something like MariaDB. If we are searching for a package, we can do dnf search. So if we wanted to do dns search Apache, we just put a keyword in, and you can see there are a lot of different available packages with the word Apache in them. So we'd have to refine our search a little bit or find the one we wanted. If you want to get information about a package, it's dnf info. So if we did dnf info and then something like, let's grab maybe this one here. It's going to give you, so to copy, you can simply highlight it in putty, and then to paste, it's just a right click. So it tells us the name, the version, the architecture, the size, the source, the repository, summary, URL, license, and description. So that's a really good way to get more information about a package before actually installing it. So to recap, we've looked at sudo dnf update, we've looked at dnf install, dnf remove, dnf search, and dnf info. And that's your crash course on DNF. With these commands, you're now equipped to manage packages and keep your Almalinux system safe, secure, and up to date. Hey everyone, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to take a tour of the Linux file system, specifically how it's structured in Almalinux. This is a critical part of becoming comfortable using Linux because everything, and I mean everything in Linux, is treated as a file. Now at the very top of the Linux file system is a single /, and we can navigate to that by doing cd, which is change directory, and then /. This is called the root directory, and we can see here when this changes to a /, they know that's what we're in. It's kind of like the C drive in Windows, but it contains all of the folders and files in the system. Every file path starts from here. If I was to do an ls-la, which is to list the directory, you can see all of the subfolders contained under the root. So there are a couple of key ones that you need to know. /bin is the essential user binaries. This contains essential command line programs used by all users. These are things like the commands we use, like ls, for example, is contained within there. These are needed even in single user mode or recovery mode. Another important one is the sbin. This is the system binaries. This holds system commands that are typically used by the root user. Commands like reboot, shutdown, and IP address. So they help manage the system at a low level. The etc is the brains of the system. It holds all system-wide configuration files. If you want to configure your network users or services, you'll probably edit files in the /etc directory. The home directory, every regular user gets a folder under home. Like for example, ours would be called /home/controller. And this is where that user's personal files, downloads, and settings are stored. We have the actual root folder. So this is the root user home directory. Unlike regular users, the root user has a separate home folder, and that's located at /root. It's private and can only be used by system administrators of the system. The var folder holds files that change frequently. Think logs, principal files, mail queues, etc. A really handy subdirectory of var, if we go and navigate into it, if we do cd/var/log. This is what contains all of the system logs for troubleshooting. So if you do an ls, you can see they're contained within different log files and different folders underneath this. To get back to root, we can just do cd/, and let's do another cd/lah to print out the entire directory. /user, despite the name user is not about user files, it actually stores installed software, libraries, and documentation. Think of it as the place where most of the operating system lives. Temp is the temporary files location, so they're stored here. These are often deleted on reboot, and programs often use this space for short-term file storage. The boot directory contains bootloader files. Essentially, the Linux kernel and all of the bootloader files are contained within there. Without this, the system can't start. It's very rare that you need to go in and actually touch something in here unless you're updating the kernel or troubleshooting boot issues, so definitely be careful. The dev is the device file, so everything in Linux is a file, even hardware, and /dev contains the device files like the hard drives, USBs, and more. And two more important ones are the proc and the sys. So this is virtual file systems. /proc and /sys let you look inside the system's current state, like the memory usage, running processes, and hardware details, all in real time. So the Linux file system might feel overwhelming at first, but once you learn the key locations, you'll feel much more at home. Hi everyone. In this lesson, I'm going to walk you through one of the most important parts of using and managing a Linux system, and that's creating users and managing permissions. Whether you're running a personal setup or a production server, understanding who can do what on your system is critical for both security and usability. So let's jump into the terminal and get started. So first of all, let's imagine we want to create a brand new user. Right now, the only two users on the device that exist are the root user, which is built into all systems by default, and the controller user that we created on installation, which acts as an administrative user. So let's say if we wanted to add a user, we would run sudo add user, and let's imagine we were onboarding a system administrator named Alice, and we just wanted to call the account Alice. We would type that in. So sudo add user. And then if you look at all the options here, but all we want to do is we just want to specify their name. So this command creates the Alice user. It also creates her home directory at /home/Alice and assigns default configurations. So for example, if we were to do an ls of /home, you now see there are two folders, controller and Alice. Next, let's set a password. So we would do a sudo passwd, all right, all one word, and specify the user. So we're changing the password. So we'll put in a new password for her. Now, best practice dictates that once we give her this password, she would log in for the first time, and then we would get her to reset that password, because we don't want to know her password, right? We want to be a secure environment. We don't want to know other people's passwords. So that is it. If we want to switch to another user, so let's imagine we wanted to test this out, we could do a su space dash space and then type in the username you want to switch user over to, in this case Alice. We would type in her password, and voila, you can see that controller at Almalinux has now changed to Alice at Almalinux. So we are now logged in as Alice. Now you'll notice that Alice does not have permissions to do administrative tasks by default. So for example, if we were to try and run sudo dnf update and put in the password, Alice is not in the sudos file. This incident will be reported. So essentially what it's saying is Alice does not have those administrative rights that we granted the controller user, and the incident gets logged in a log file. So later on, a system admin can go and check and say, hey, why were you trying to do this? Maybe Alice was trying to do something a little bit naughty, and we can go and follow that up. So we'll change back to our controller user with the su command. If we wanted to elevate Alice to have sudo rights, we need to add her to the wheel group, and the wheel group grants administrative privileges. The command we would run is sudo usermod dash lowercase a for alpha, capital G for golf. Then we specify the group name, which is wheel, and the user Alice. So Alice has now been added to this sudoers file and the wheel group so that she could run elevated commands. We can test it out by logging back in as Alice. And now when we do a sudo dnf update, there we go. It worked, but essentially because our system's up to date, there was no updates to run. So let's keep logged in as Alice, and now let's look at file permissions. If we were to run ls-l, at the moment we don't have any files in this directory. But if we were to do a touch, and let's call this text file.txt, now if we run an ls, we can see text file. If we run an ls-l, we're going to see the permissions of that file, and they are specified right here. So let's break this down. The first part right here, this little dash, if it's a directory, it will say D. If it's a file, it will just have a dash. The next three characters break down what the owner of this file can do. So right now, Alice is the owner, and they have read, write permissions, but they do not have execute. The group that's assigned is also called Alice. They have read only. And finally, others also have read only. Now we can change who owns a file using the chown command, and we can change permissions using chmod or chmod. So let's say we wanted to chown this file and we wanted controller to be the owner. We would just type in chown controller test file. Oh, we need to do a sudo before that. Can't forget to elevate ourselves up. Now if we do an ls-l, check it out. The user assignment has changed so that controller is now the owner of the file. If we wanted to edit these permissions, so if we wanted to give everyone on the system, the owner, the group, and the others, the correct permissions to read, write, and execute, we could do a chmod 777 testfile.txt. And I keep forgetting that sudo command. My apologies. There we go. So now rwx for the owner, read, write, execute, rwx for the group, read, write, execute, and rwx for everyone else. If we only wanted the owner to have read, write, and execute, then we would simply change the 777 there to 700. Now if we do an LSL, check it out. That has changed to this, and now only the first three characters are highlighted, which means that the owner has read, write, and execute, and the rest have no permissions. If we wanted everyone to read, but only the owner to write, that would represent as 644. So there you go, read, write, read, and read. So now we have learnt some of the fundamental commands. I'll have a little bit of a cheat sheet coming up that you can refer to with a lot of these. It does take a little bit of getting used to, especially if you're a beginner and you're not coming over from another Linux operating system. But eventually you get the hang of it and you end up reading lines like this with ease. Essentially the breakdown is the permissions, the owners, the size of the file, the last modified date, and then the file name. That's it for this lesson though. Hopefully you now understand adding users, setting passwords, giving admin rights, and managing file permissions with chmod and chown. This is foundational knowledge for any Linux user, but it's especially important for managing Almalinux securely because most of the time we'll be using this in production enterprise environments. Within our Almalinux operating system, managing the system services is a critical part of maintaining a stable and secure system. Whether you're starting services, stopping them, or enabling them at boot, the tool of choice is systemctl. Systemctl is a command line utility used to examine and control the systemd system and service manager. Now, the systemd is the default init system in Almalinux and most modern Linux distributions, and it's responsible for booting the system and managing the services that are running inside of it. So let's break down some of the most essential systemctl commands that you'll need as a beginner. The first one is to actually start up a service. So we can do a sudo systemctl start, and then you would define the system name. So if we go ahead and hit enter, you'll see that there are too few arguments because we haven't entered an actual service running. Another command that we can do is we can check the status of our processes. And if we just run sudo systemctl status, you'll see a whole bunch of different ones running. So for example, the SSHD is a service. So if we were to stop that, we'd suddenly get kicked out of the machine. Cron D is another one. We have sessions, we have dbuses, a whole bunch of different services. So let's say, for example, we wanted to stop one. We could do a sudo systemctl stop, and let's say we wanted to stop the cron D services. So we could just put in the name right there. Now if we do a status of cron_d.service, we will see that currently it is inactive. If we wanted to start it back up again, we simply change the command to start cron_d service. Then again, if we check the status, now it has changed to active running. So we've seen how to list the services, we've seen how to check the status of an individual service and stop and start it. You can also use the command restart. So if you don't want to have to stop and then start, you can use restart, which will automatically stop it and then start the service again. There is a ability to also run a command that makes sure the service starts automatically on system boot. So whenever you're creating new services, they are not going to be started automatically on boot. What you have to do is sudo systemctl enable, and then you would put in the name. So let's say, for example, we could do it on the cron_d service, and that will make sure that it always runs on startup. It does by default, but that's just to show you an example of the command. If we wanted to prevent the service from starting on boot, instead of disable, we would replace it with disable. To reload a service configuration without stopping it, we would simply run a sudo systemctl reload and then the service name. So in this case, we could do something like reload cron_d service. So this reloads the configuration file without stopping the service, and it only works if the service actually supports it. So you may have to refer to the user manual of whatever service you're actually trying to reload to see if it does. Another possibility of listing all the active services is we can run systemctl. We'll have to do a sudo in front of it. List-units --type equals service. And that's going to give you not only the service name, but the loaded state, the active state, the running state, as well as the description. So we can see that the cron_d service is to do with NTP. The cron_d service, which we've been playing around with, is the command scheduler. And you can just see how many different services are set to boot on by default, because we have not really installed anything yet on this system. If you want to list all of them, including even the inactive ones, it's a sudo systemctl list units type service --all. And here we can see a whole list of them, and even the ones that are currently inactive. So for example, if we look at the device mapper event daemon, that one is currently inactive and it's not running. So that's a good way to see maybe what's running or what's installed on your system that's no longer needed, and you could potentially uninstall it. We can check to see if any services failed during boot with a sudo systemctl --failed, and we can see there that 0 loaded units listed. So that means none failed on the last boot up of this system. So really what we've shown you is quite a couple of commands. We've looked at start, stop, enable, disable, restart, status, and reload, as well as some really powerful commands to be able to list the services installed on any machine. And this is something that a lot of system admins will do regularly to clean up the system, right? They'll check what's running, they'll check if any are causing issues, but it's also important as part of troubleshooting. Let's say we had an application on this machine, and during patching we had to reload this box and the application did not run up. We could do something like a systemctl status on that service, all right? And what we're going to do is we're going to be able to check if it's running or not. So a really good one, and a good example to think of is something like Apache, like a web server. You reboot the server and suddenly the web page is not loading. You would jump in here, you would do a sudo systemctl status Apache, potentially see that maybe it is stopped, and then you would run a start command to reload it back up. But that is systemctl in a nutshell. Like I say, a really core system administration task, and it's great for managing services within our Almalinux system. Hey, and welcome back. Before we dive into Firewall D, let's understand what a firewall is. Now, a firewall acts like a security gate for your computer. It monitors network traffic and decides whether to allow or block certain connections based on the defined rules that you and your fellow system administrators set. This helps protect your system from unauthorized access, malware, or attacks from the internet or other networks. Now, it's not to be confused with network firewall devices. These are physical or sometimes virtual devices dedicated towards the firewall infrastructure, and they are to let traffic in and out of your entire network, whereas the firewalls on individual servers are just the traffic to that one machine. Now, traditionally in Linux systems, a lot of them use tools like IP tables to manage firewalls. Whilst powerful, it's a little bit complex for beginners, and that's really where Firewall D comes in. So Firewall D is a modern firewall management tool that uses simple commands to manage complex firewall rules. It runs as a background service and uses concepts like zones to define trust levels for network interfaces. It uses services to define common ports used by applications like HTTP or SSH, and ports that you can allow or block specifically. Firewall D supports both runtime, which is temporary, or permanent rules. First thing we're going to want to do is check that Firewall D is actually installed. Now, it typically comes pre-installed with Almalinux, but it never hurts to check. So we'll do a sudo dnf install firewall d-y. And there you go. It is already installed. So let's check the status of it. Let's make sure that it's currently running. It is. Now let's go ahead and make sure it's currently enabled, which means that it's going to start on boot. So we can see there that it is. If we had any issues with that, the simple command to fix that would be sudo systemctl enable firewall D, and that makes sure it starts up as soon as the machine is started. If we ever see this as inactive, the command to start it would be sudo systemctl start firewall D. Now, to actually check the firewall's running state, we can do a sudo firewall-cmd --state. And that's going to tell us if it's running. If it says not running, it means the firewall is currently off and not protecting the system. Now, it is possible for the firewall service to be active, but the state to be not running. So we have to always be careful of that. Now, next up, we need to start talking about zones. Now, zones represent different levels of trust within our Almalinux systems. You can assign network interfaces like our ENS160 to a zone, and each zone has its own rules. Some of those rules are public, so there's a public zone. This is the default one, and it's used for untrusted networks like the internet. We have the home zone, which is for trusted home networks, the internal zone for internal company networks. We have the DMZ for publicly accessible servers like web servers. We have drop, where all incoming traffic is dropped and outgoing is allowed, and trusted. So to see all of them, we can do a sudo firewall-cmd --list all zones. And there you can see these 6 I just talked about. So block, remember, this is for blocking traffic. DMZ is for publicly accessible servers like web servers. We have drop, which is going to drop all incoming traffic, but outgoing is allowed. We have external, we have home, we have internal, shared, and public, which is the current active one. We'll talk about that in a little bit, as well as trusted and work. So to check the default zone, we can simply do a sudo firewall cmd --get default zone. And we can see there that the current set one is public. And to see what is allowed in a zone, we're going to do a sudo firewall cmd --list all. So we can see currently the public is the active zone. The allowed services are pretty much everything. The open ports, we currently see none there, and the interfaces assigned is our interface right here. So when we need to allow a service, remember that services are predefined rules for common applications like HTTP, HTTPS, and SSH. So if we wanted to, for example, allow SSH, we would do a sudo firewall cmd zone equals public. So we define the zone name. Then we do add service equals SSH, and we'll make sure that this is a permanent rule. So let's recap. I think I spelled that wrong. There we go. So we're activating the firewall CMD. We're setting the zone. We're adding a service, and we're telling it to permanently add this to the firewall rules. So we can see there that we've got an error basically saying that SSH is already enabled. You can see that one right there, as well as cockpit DHCP. If we wanted to allow HTTP, then we could go HTTP. Now, if we check out the rules, you can see that it's not currently there. That's because we have to reload the firewall. And we do that with a sudo firewall-cmd --reload. And there's successful. So if we check it again, we can now see HTTP has been added into that list. Now, some apps don't use well-known ports, so you can allow specific ones manually. And we do that with a sudo firewall cmd, define the zone, define the add port. Then you're going to type in the port number as well as the protocol, so whether it's TCP, UDP, ICMP, etc. And then we say permanent. We're going to use the reload command, and then we're going to check the list again, and we now see that we have several services as well as a port right here. If you no longer need a service or a port open, you can remove it. So we will do a sudo firewall cmd, define the zone, and remove service equals HTTP, and we want to make this permanent. Alright, so it looks like we may have, oh, I forgot a dash, sorry, it's double dash. There we go. And then we would just reload the firewall again, and let's take a look at the lists. HTTP has been removed. So we have seen here that firewalls are extremely easy to use within Almalinux. If we wanted to see a list of all the built-in services that you can allow, we can use the sudo firewall cmd get services, and it's going to give us a whole bunch of lists here of the different services. So things like HTTP, HTTPS, SSH, SMTP, IMAP, Samba, MySQL, and many, many more. Remember that if you do not define the permanent right here, it will be active in the firewall, but it will be lost on reboot. So we add the permanent command to ensure it is saved and restored at boot. So throughout the course, we have now seen, and throughout this lesson, we have now seen how to use Firewall D at the fundamental levels, right? When we're building a server, it's super important that we get the firewalls right, because we want to control what traffic is coming into our devices, right? We don't want to open SSH to the world. We don't want to do things like open up ports that are going to potentially harm our systems, so we control it with Firewall D. Thank you very much for sticking with me throughout this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Let's now talk about disk management. So this is the art of preparing storage drives like hard drives or SSDs for use on our systems. Whenever we're adding new disks, we need to think about partitioning the disk, formatting it with a file system, mounting it to the Linux file system tree, and ensuring that the disk remains available after reboot. Now, let's just say we've just added a disk in, like a virtual disk, which I've actually gone and done. In VMware Workstation, I've added a 45GB SATA disk into the mix, a virtual disk, and we're going to look at how to provision it in this lesson. So within our command line, we're going to do a sudo lsblk, and this is going to show you the different disks assigned. Now, we have the NVMe one right here, and what this one is the one that we created on boot. So it's 64GB in size, and it's divided into the root partition, the swap, and the home. Now the one I just created was the S You can see here it's 45 gigabytes in size, and we have added that in. But if we do a df-h, which shows all of the devices on all of the disks on our device, we can see that that one is not currently being used, right? We can see our Almalinux home, we can see our Almalinux root, as well as some other temporary ones, but the SDA does not exist. It's essentially, it's unpartitioned. If we do a sudo fdisk-l, we can see the same thing. So we have our 64 gigabyte one right here, and then down the bottom we have our SDA, that's the device name, 45 gigabytes, but it is not at all partitioned. So what we can do is we can do a sudo fdisk-dev-sda, and it's going to take us into this little fdisk utility. So changes will only remain in memory until you decide to write them, and always be careful before using the write command, because if you do this on a disk that has data, you could end up overwriting it. So we can type in M for help, and it's going to give us the key letters we need to use throughout this. In our case, we're going to first do the letter N, and this is to create a new partition. We are going to then type in the letter P, because we want a primary partition. Our options are primary or extended. We want primary. We're going to just hit enter. We're going to accept the default partition number, which is 1. We're going to accept the default start and end sectors, so just enter and then enter again. And there you can see that we created a new partition of type Linux, and the size is 45 gigabytes. Now this is not saved right now. We have to use the W key to write and exit. And what this has now done is it's created, if we do another sudo fdisk-l, you can see the disk dev SDA exists, and now there is an SDA1 partition. So now we need to format that partition, and we're going to format it as XFS. So we'll do a sudo mkfs.xfs/dev/sda1. And there we go. Now, if we wanted to do it as ext4, for example, we would just do ext4, but we've decided to do it as xfs. And you can see it's given us a bit of details. You don't need to really understand all of this as a beginner. You just really need to understand that we've formatted it. Now we need to mount the partition. So we first need to create somewhere to mount it. So let's create a mount directory. We're going to go /mount/new disk. And of course, we need our sudo. So sudo make directory /mount new disk. And if we do an ls/lah in /mount, we can see there we've created that mount partition. So now we do sudo mount /dev SDA1 to that location. And if we do a df/h, there we go. Dev SDA1 is now mapped to mount new disk. So if I was to cd into that location, I could create files. I could, of course we need sudo. I could make directories. Etc, etc. One thing you need to be aware of is everything we've just done will not permanently mount this disk. We need to now make the mount permanent. The first thing we need to do is we need to get the UUID of the partition. So we'll do sudo blkid /dev/sda1, and we're going to grab all of this right here, but without the quotation marks. Now we need to edit what's called the fstab file. So sudo etc fstab, and we need to go ahead. You can see already there are the partitions that are permanently mounted. This is the file that gets read every time that we need to do that. So we'll do UUID equals, we're pretty much just going to copy this formatting up here. So UUID equals, whoops, I'm not sure, okay. I'm not sure where it got all that from. Let's exit, grab that again. Let's try this again. There we go, that looks better. The location for the mount is mount new disk. It's XFS, and we're just going to leave the defaults. And then we're going to save and quit. We'll do a sudo mount-a. And if there's no error, then we've done this correctly. So now for the big test. Let's reboot our system. All right, now it's going to take maybe 30 or so seconds to reboot it. But when we come back, the test will be, is that disk permanently mounted in the location that we created? And because we edited that fstab file, the answer should be a resounding yes. So we'll right click on our putty and click on restart session. And hopefully the reboot doesn't take very long and we're able to get back in. And there we go. We have successfully completed the mounting of our disk and the permanent mounting to the mount new disk location. One thing I will say when you're adding disks is always make sure your boot order is correct. Always make sure that the partition that you've actually installed Almalinux on is going to boot first. But now you've got a core system administration view of disk management, so you can take this out into the world and provision disks for web servers, for file sharing, and everything that you may need. A really common reason for spinning up an Almalinux host is to run a web server off of it. You know, most of the powerful websites that you visit daily are powered by Linux, and you'd be surprised at how many of these are probably running Almalinux as the operating system underneath. So a web server essentially just hosts websites and serves web pages to users when requested through a web browser. And Apache HTTP Server is the most widely used web server software in the Linux world. And it's the default one on Almalinux, although it's called HTTPD. So to install it, we're going to do a sudo dnf install. Oops. Let's try that again. Sudo dnf install httpd-y. And this is going to install the Apache web server package. We're going to elevate ourselves up with the sudo password, and we can see all of the apps and the dependencies that are going to be installed as a result. Gives us a pretty good indication of how fast it downloaded, what it installed, and you can see here it has completed. So the first thing that we will do is we will start the service, and we'll also just do a status to ensure that it is active running. Now moving forward, we're going to want Apache to start on boot. So that's where we're going to do a sudo systemctl enable httpd. And again, we can just do a status to ensure that that is now showing as enabled and active running. All right. Now, the default root directory where Apache serves files is located in the var www html location. And if we do an ls-lah, we can see that currently nothing is in there. If we were to go back one, we can see there are two folders, but really the HTML one is the one that we are going to be most caring about. Now, before we get into this, the other thing we really need to do is think about the firewall, right? You'll remember that at the moment, we do not have any of the firewall ports open for HTTP and HTTPS. I think we added them, and then we also showed you how to remove them. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add those back in. But beforehand, let's just do a quick check to see what is currently there. So we're allowing port 80, but not the HTTP and HTTPS. So let's go ahead and get those added. Let's try that one. So sudo firewall cmd zone public add service HTTP, and then we're going to use the up arrow, and we're going to add HTTPS as well. We need to reload the firewall, and then if we do a quick check, we should now see those two ports show. So what we've done is we have installed Almalinux as well as added the firewall rules to allow HTTP and HTTPS. So within this, remember there's nothing currently in the HTML file. We'll do a touch index.html. We need sudo, and then we'll do a vi into that file. And let's just go and grab some HTML text and paste it in there so we have something to test out a little bit later on. So we've copy and pasted, so we've just got a header and a little bit of a body. We'll do a WQ to save and quit. Oh, all right, let's try this again. I know why. Because the classic of forgetting the sudo. I need to get that tattooed on me. There we go. Cool. So that time we have actually added the index.html file. We've added some content to it. Let's restart our HTTP service. And then in the next lesson, let's give it a little bit of a try to make sure we can access it. So just a quick lesson this time to show that I've gone ahead and popped in the IP address. This is from another machine as well, bear that in mind. I've popped in the IP address and there we have hit our wedge page. So we've successfully set up Apache HTTPD on our environment. This is a really common task for system administrators. Like I say, Linux is definitely the most popular web server and Apache being on Almalinux is probably the go-to. So you may be in an environment and your boss asks you, hey, we need to go set up this website. Can you go install Apache? And now you can say that you can do that. In this lesson, let's now take a look at installing and using MariaDB. Now, MariaDB is a popular open source relational database system. It's a drop-in replacement for MySQL, and it's widely used in web applications and enterprise environments. You know, a lot of the websites will be running a back end that has a Maria database, especially a lot of the shopping websites. So think about a time where you've gone onto a clothing retailer's website, or maybe even something like buying shoes online. Each of those items that you buy will have a place in a database, and the database collects details on how many items are in stock, how many items are in stock for each of the sizes. So you may have something like small, medium, large, extra large, different colors of the shirts or different colors of the pants. You may have different details as to the price of them, so you can update the database when they're on sale. So MariaDB is really an important thing to have to use, but it's not just limited to sales websites. It's used by everything like the healthcare industry, the finance, banking, absolutely every industry I can think of. So the first thing that we need to do is install MariaDB and its server components. And we do that with the command we're all very, very familiar with now, sudo dnf install MariaDB-server, and we're going to do a -y to say yes, we want to install it. We're going to pop in our password, and you can see there's quite a lot that comes with MariaDB. You know, we have not just the MariaDB packages, we also have a lot of Perl packages as well, and a lot of Python 3. So it's going to have to reach out to the main repositories, download them. Fortunately, a lot of them are quite small, you know, they're in the kilobytes of size. So the whole process does not take very long at all. As it's reaching out, it's downloading the authentic packages, which is really important and why something like DNF install is so powerful. You know, lo and behold, with like Windows Server and macOS, you have to go and find the correct installer, download, and do it through websites. But there's always a kind of sneaky thing where attackers will register a similar domain or do something like breach the website and put illegitimate installers, whereas you know that when you're installing them from the official repos, they are safe. So now that we have MariaDB successfully installed, we can see it completed there and it installed all these different packages. We're going to do our sudo systemctl start MariaDB, and we're also going to enable it to ensure that it always starts on boot up, right? We want our Maria databases running as soon as the system boots if we ever take it down for patching or if it ever crashes for whatever reason. And if we do a sudo systemctl status, we can see not only is it enabled, but it is currently active running, and the logs show everything is happy. So once we have installed MariaDB, we can run a security script to set the root password and remove any insecure defaults. So the command we can run is sudo mysql_secure_installation. So the first thing, we're going to be prompted to set a password. All right, so we're going to enter the current password for root. From here, it's going to ask us if we want to switch to Unix socket authentication. And the cool thing is it's going to give us a whole bunch of details as to what we're currently doing. So setting the root password or using the Unix socket ensures that nobody can log into the MariaDB root user without the proper authorization. So we can say something like, yes. Do we want to change the root password? We're going to say no. Do we want to remove anonymous users? So by default, a MariaDB installation has an anonymous user, allowing anyone to log into MariaDB without having to have a user account created for them. This is intended only for testing and to make the installation go a bit smoother. So of course, being a secure environment, we want to remove the anonymous user. Do we want to disallow root login remotely? So normally root should only be allowed to connect from localhost. This ensures that someone cannot guess at the root password from the network. So do we want to disallow that? Yes, we do. Do we want to remove the test database? So MariaDB comes shipped with a database named test that anyone can access. This is also intended for testing. So we are going to remove that one. And finally, do we want to reload the privilege tables? Yes, we do, to apply all of those settings. So now that we've done that, we can log into our MariaDB shell as root. So we're going to sudo mysql-u root-p. We'll type in the root password. And congratulations, we are officially connected to Maria database. So I just want to run you through some of the most common commands you're going to use inside MariaDB. Obviously, MariaDB is such a massive environment that it could almost take up its own course in itself. You know, I just want to get you familiarized with the basics, and then if you're interested in learning more, you can go out and get that information. So one thing I will say is a lot of these commands are very case sensitive, so be careful when I'm putting everything in capitals, it's for a reason. So let's say we want to create a database, all right? So we can do create database, and let's create one called my database. And it's important that we add this little semicolon at the end. So we hit enter, and we have created a database. So now if we do show databases, all right, we have a couple built in by default. So the information schema, the MySQL, and the performance schema. But we have also created my database there. If we want to create a user, we can do create user, let's say my user, and take notes that it's in quotation marks there. So my user at localhost, identified by, and then we can say something like my password. All right, and now we have created a user for our SQL environment. If we wanted to grant them access to a database, we could do grant all privileges on my database .star to, and then we're just going to copy my user at localhost here, paste it in, and then end it. And we could do something like flush privileges to reset those privilege tables. Cool. So we looked at how to show our databases. Now what if we want to use our database? So let's say use my database. All right, and now instead of being in the MariaDB none, we are in MariaDB my database, and that's how you switch across different databases. Because it's pretty common for a Maria database server to have multiple databases hosting different information. So let's say we wanted now to create a table within our MariaDB database. We could do create table, users. We're going to do an open bracket here, and if we hit enter, it's going to take us to a new line. We can do ID, integer, auto increment primary key, then do a comma to start a new line, name varchar 100, comma, email varchar 100, and finally if we go ahead and close it off with a close bracket and then the colon, we have successfully created a table. Now if we want to insert data into that table, we can do insert into users, name and email, we need a space there, values, and now we're going to type in some values. So let's imagine we wanted to enter in Alice, and the email address was alice@danmilltraining.com, and we close that off. All right, so let's take a look. Looks like I spelt the word insert wrong. So, oops, let's try that again. Oh, okay, looks like we have a into users. It should be user. So this kind of just proves that MariaDB is extremely case sensitive, but it's also sensitive when it comes to entering in the text. You cannot make any mistakes when typing in this sort of data, otherwise it is going to spit an error. But the good thing is the errors are extremely detailed, right? They're telling you exactly where you're making a mistake, so you can go back and fix it. So now if we was to do a select all from users, keep typing in users, let's do user. We can see there the table, there is an ID of 1, the name of Alice, and the email address we entered. So this could be, this database could be related to a web page getting users to put in their contact details and then saving it within this database. Now to exit the MariaDB shell, we just type exit and we are back to our normal root cell. So in this lesson, we've looked at how to install MariaDB, how to log in, and some of the most common use commands. Hopefully this has taught you a whole bunch. I'll go ahead and see you in the next lesson. Now, a really common role of any Linux server out there, especially on Almalinux, is using it as a file server. So setting up a file server on Almalinux allows users to share files across a network securely and efficiently. The most popular way to accomplish this is by using Samba, which enables file sharing between Linux systems, but also Windows systems as well. So in this lesson, let's take a look at how to set up a Samba file server so that if we are working in an organization and there's a requirement to set up a file share, whether it be a location for the backups to go to or for users to upload and download files, that we know how to do this and we can tick it off on our resume. So the first thing we need to do is we need to install a couple of packages. Now we're all very familiar at this point with DNF install. So in this case with sudo DNF install, we're going to install 3 different packages. So Samba, then we separate them with a space. We're also going to be installing Samba client and Samba common. And we'll do a -y. We'll elevate ourselves up with our password. And there you can see all the different packages and dependencies that are going to be installed. So it's now going to go through and pull the official packages from the local repository, and it has already done it, which is extremely quick. Now you remember early on we created a disk called new disk. Let's create a directory within there that we want to share out. So we'll do make directory, mount new disk, and let's create one called shared. So now if I ls/lah into mount new disk, we have the shared folder right here. All right. So we need to set some permissions on this. So we can do a sudo chmod. Let's say recursive. We're going to say 0775. Make sure you go back and look at the file permissions course if you're still unsure about these values. Mount new disk shared. If we do our ls/lah again, we can see it has updated to reflect the correct permissions there. We're also going to do a sudo chown, and we are going to assign nobody to be the owner and nobody to be the group, and we'll do that for the mount new disk shared. Alright, so we can't do nobody. In that case, let's just leave it as root there. That's fine. So now we actually need to configure Samba. So we'll do a sudo vi etc samba, and the config file that we need to edit is smb.conf. So within here, there are some default settings that you can go through. You know, you can share out a global directory, homes. Samba can also be used for printers. But what we want to do is we want to go down the bottom here. We're going to create one called shared, and we're going to first put in the path. So we'll say /mount/new disk/shared. We're going to make it browsable. So we'll go browsable. We've got to spell it correctly. Equals yes. Read only equals no. Guest okay equals yes. Now, typically in a production environment, you'd be setting some strict permissions, but we just want to get something up and running for the lab. And we're going to say force user equals root. All right. Now, again, you wouldn't do that in a production environment, extremely insecure, but for our demonstration's sake, let's go ahead and do it so we can get it up and running. So we now need to ensure that we have the processes enabled. So we're going to do a sudo systemctl enable SMB to make sure it comes up every time we reboot the system. And we'll also start it and then check on its status to ensure it is running, which it is. Now we're just going to give it a quick restart. Because we changed the smb.conf file, every time you change that, you do have to edit it. One more thing that we have to do is we have to add the Samba service into the firewall. So we'll do a sudo firewall cmd permanent. We're going to make this a permanent rule. We're going to do it on the public zone, and we're going to add the service of Samba, and then we're going to reload the firewall. All right. So with this, I will say I'm not a fan of doing it in root. So maybe what we might do just very quickly is we can do a sudo user add Samba user and sudo password Samba user. And we'll use this user to assign the folder and assign the permissions to. So we'll give it a password. I don't want to be teaching bad habits too often. All right, so then we're going to do sudo smb password -a Samba user. Create a new Samba password. And let's go back into the file and go down here. We're going to change force user into Samba user, and we'll say valid users instead of force. We'll restart that process, so we'll go up and grab the restart command, paste that one in, and we'll also, if we cd into mount new disk and do an ls/lah, we'll chown Samba user to that folder. We'll do that with a sudo. Cool. So what we've done is we have installed Samba. We've created a shared directory. We've created a Samba user and configured the Samba configuration file to essentially use that user to browse that directory. We've added the firewall rules and we've restarted the Samba service. So in the next lesson, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and test out accessing our file share to make sure everything we've done is correct. But at least now you can set up your own Samba share. You can play around with it, jump onto the Almalinux website and look at the different permissions that you can set up and really get to grips with this important role on our Almalinux servers. And thanks to the magic of Samba, we now have, when we browse to our Almalinux box, we have the shared folder there. Now we also have the Samba user folder. That's because I logged in as the Samba user. Typically you would set up file permissions for each user connecting. You may even tie it into something like LDAP or Kerberos to give strict permissions through Active Directory. But now you've seen the fundamentals of setting up a Samba share within Almalinux. Let's now run through some of the most critical troubleshooting tools available within Almalinux. So understanding how to use the key tools for diagnosing and fixing common system issues is extremely important as a system administrator, because unfortunately it's not always going to be running perfectly, our servers that is. So we need to know how to troubleshoot and fix the underlying root cause of when problems arise. Let's start off with tackling one of the most handy things to know as a system administrator, and that's where to find logs. So if we want journal logs, journal logs to do with our system, we can do a journal ctl space -xe, and xe is going to show recent logs with details on errors. So if we take a look, we can see all the different errors currently being provided by the system, and that's going to help us narrow down exactly what the issue is. So we can exit that with a Q. If you want to look up a specific name, you do a journal ctl-u. Let's say we wanted to look up the SSH logs. We can do a journal ctl-u sshd, and that's going to give us the latest logs on that service. So we could do the same for HTTPD, for example. You could do the same for any of the other apps that we have installed. There's also traditional file logs to be found in the /var/log directory. So if we do an ls/lah, you can see there's lots of logs, one's to do with the firewall, one's to do with Maria, HTTP, Samba, SSD. So we could do something like tail messages with a sudo at the front, and that's going to give us the last of the file of the lines within that messages folder. So keep an eye out for the var log, as it's extremely handy when troubleshooting issues. What about if we are checking on system resources? So we think there's a problem potentially with the system resources. Well, the first command you need to know about is top. So top is going to show a lot of different things. It's going to show the load average of the machine. It's going to tell us how many processes are running, and of those, how many are running, sleeping, stopped, and zombified. CPU details, like how high the CPU usage is reaching, as well as memory and swap usages too. Then down the bottom here, we have an ever updating list of all the processes that are currently running. So you can jump in here and take a look if there is a particular process using up too much CPU or too much memory, and go ahead and kill that process. If we want to find out a bit more about our virtual memory stats, we do that with a VM stat. So we can check it every 2 seconds 5 times, and that's going to go through and every 2 seconds print out details on our virtual statistics 5 times. If we wanted to do it over an extended period, we could do something like every 2 seconds 50 times. So that will run for 100 seconds in total, giving us 50 outputs. And that way we can potentially see if something's spiking and then coming down, and then spiking and coming down. If we want to look at the memory usage in more details, we can run the command free-h. Oops, let's try that again. Free-h. And that's going to tell us how much memory we have, how much is used, how much is free, as well as the swap details as well. And finally, if we're only interested in the load average, a simple uptime command is going to give you the load average over the last 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and more. It's also going to tell you how long this system has been up for in case it needs a reboot. From a networking troubleshooting standpoint, we already know about the IP-addr command, so checking the IP address. We know how to ping, so we can ping IP addresses. Otherwise, we can ping DNS names. So if we suspected an issue with DNS, we could do something like ping google.com and make sure it resolves. There's also tracepath in Linux, so we can trace path to google.com, and that's going to tell us the path that traffic takes. If we want to look at the modern netstat, it's called socket statistics. So we could do an ss-tuln, and that's going to give us all of the open connections currently on our system. If we want to do DNS queries, we do those with a dig. So if we wanted to look up facebook.com, for example, or if we wanted to look up something like danieltraining.com, we can do a dig and it's going to give us details as to the A records. But there's a lot more you can do with dig. You can get MX records, CNAME records, text records, anything that you may need. When it comes to service troubleshooting, we already know about system CTL. So we can check the status of, for example, HTTP and make sure that our web page is loading. So our Apache HTTP server, the process is running and what the last logs are. Remember that the commands there is you can stop processes, you can restart processes, you can start them, you can enable or disable them. There's a lot of different commands that you can do with system CTL. And if we ever want to list out all of the units, we can do that with a systemctl list-units-type equals service, and that's going to tell us everything that's running on our system. One of the more common issues is disk space, right? So eventually our file servers, our web servers start to fill up on space, and that's where the df-h command comes in handy. It's going to give us details on the disks that we have mounted, the size of them, the amount used, the amount available, and the usage percentage, as well as where they're currently mounted. If we need to get the directory size of a particular folder, so let's say we suspect that the var log file is starting to fill up our drive a bit, we can do a do-sh and then specify the directory, and that's going to tell us how big a particular folder is. So this is really handy for navigating our different folders and file structures to determine what the largest one is. If we was to just do a sudo ds-h, for example, and we did it on the root directory, we could see there that, altogether there is about 2 gigabytes of data currently stored on the system. And then we can narrow it down. We could go into, for example, the etc. We can look at the var, all those different directories to try and find what is potentially the culprit of using up all our disk space. We can do a lsblk to get details on the mounted disks and their partitions. And that should be it from the disk side of things. We can also, the last one I want to kind of talk about is process and boot troubleshooting. So PS is going to show currently running processes. You can do a PS AUX to see absolutely everything. And then we can specify with grep exactly what we're looking for. So if we wanted to see what process was running with HTTP right now, we could get that and get their process IDs. The last command I want to show you is demessage less, and that's going to give you details on hardware and boot issues. So at the moment you can see there it's giving us a whole bunch of information about the virtual platform that this VM is running on. So there we've seen a lot of the helpful tools available through Almalinux to help us troubleshoot issues whenever they may arise. I want to talk to you now about a really cool security package available on Almalinux and most Linux systems, and that's something called fail to ban. So this is a powerful security tool that protects your Linux server from brute force and other automated attacks. It scans logs files for suspicious activity and bans IPs that exhibit malicious behavior. For example, let's imagine that you set up a Linux server and for some reason it was exposed out on the internet, right? Typically, we wouldn't do that for things like our SSH port, but let's even say, something like our HTTP or HTTPS because we're running a web browser. Well, there are a lot of bots out there that do malicious activity that try to scan for these ports and then try common attacks against them. So what can happen is these frequent targets for these brute force attempts, fail to ban will help prevent unauthorized access by monitoring files, detecting failed attempts, and then automatically blocking the offending IP addresses. Now, fail to ban is not included by default in Almalinux repositories, but it is available in the EPEL, which is the extra packages for Enterprise Linux, which we're first going to install. So we'll do a sudo dnf install EPEL release. There's also a lot of handy other packages available in this environment, so I highly suggest you check it out. Once that's done, we're going to install fail to ban. So sudo dnf install fail to ban. That's going to reach out and download that for those extra packages. So let's go ahead and wait for it to complete the installation. Another really good tool that you might want to install through the extra packages is something called htop. So we covered top in the troubleshooting area. Htop is kind of like an improvement on top of that one. In fact, I don't think it's very big, so let's see if we can just install it quickly. So we're going to install sudo dnf install htop. I know we're kind of going off topic a little bit here, but I think it's worth showing you. This is htop, so it's a lot more graphically pleasing. Shows you the CPUs, the memory, the swap, the load average, the uptime, and the processes. And you can even kill processes from within here with the up and down arrows. Anyway, back to fail to ban. So fail to ban's configuration file is located in the, if we do cd etc fail to ban and we do an ls, there is a fail to ban conf file. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a local copy. All right, so we're going to do sudo copy the jail.conf into the jail.local. So yeah, the main two config files are the fail to ban and the jail config one. So we'll also do it for the fail to ban. So we'll say fail to ban.local, fail to ban.conf. So now we should have backups for both of those files. So now what we can do is we can go and edit the local copy. So we'll do a sudo vi etc fail to ban jail.local. We're going to search for the SSH section. All right. So if we go up, I think we just passed it. Yep, there we go. So the SSHD one right here. So let's change a few things. So we're going to say enabled equals true, port equals 22, filter equals SSHD, log path equals var log secure. The maximum amount of retries we're going to set is 5. The ban time is going to be 24 hours and the find time within 10 minutes. And then we can just hash out these other ones. All right, cool. So now we have set that up. We can go enable the process to always start on boot. Then we're going to start the process. We're going to check its status. Oops. Status. Cool. Everything seems to be running there. You can also do things like monitor fail to ban. So you can do something like a sudo fail to ban client status, and that's going to show you any IPs that are in jail. You can do it specifically for processes like SSHD, and it's going to give you a whole lot of information. And you can even unban IPs. So let's say, for example, there was an IP address that got banned. We'd do a sudo fail to ban -client set SSHD unban IP, and then you would just type in the IP address. So in conclusion, fail to ban is a lightweight yet powerful way to protect your Almalinux servers from brute force attacks and malicious activity.